In the preceding section, we mentioned three simple possibilities for the intonation used in pronouncing the one-word utterances yes and no. These were level, fall, and rise tones. And in this lesson, we will continue talking about English intonation. 15.2 Tone and tone languages. It will often be necessary to use symbols to represent tones, and for this we will use marks placed before the syllable in the following way. This is called tone transcription. So this symbol here refers to a level tone, and this one refers to a falling tone, and the last one refers to a rising tone. Now this simple system for tone transcription could be extended. If we wish to cover a greater number of possibilities between high level and low level, for example, we could do it in this way. So the following symbol here refers to a high level tone, and this one refers to a low level tone. Now let's talk about what is meant by a tone language. Tone languages are languages in which the tone can determine the meaning of a given word, and changing from one tone to another can completely change the meaning. Mandarin Chinese is a good example of tone languages. For example, this word here, ma, when produced with a level tone, it means mother. When produced with a rising tone, it means hemp. And when produced with a falling tone, it means cold. 15.3 Complex tones and pitch height. So far, we've introduced three simple tones that can be used on one-syllable English utterances. However, more complex tones are also used, and those are the fall-rise and the rise-fall tones. The fall-rise tone, which is quite frequently found, is one where the pitch descends and then rises again. On the other hand, the rise-fall tone, which is much less frequently used, follows the opposite movement. At this point, let's talk about pitch range. Each speaker has his or her own normal pitch range. A top level, which is the highest pitch used by the speaker, and a bottom level that the speaker's pitch normally doesn't go below. In ordinary speech, the intonation tends to take place within the lower part of a speaker's pitch range, but in situations where strong feelings are to be expressed, it is usual to make use of extra pitch height. Pitch range can be represented by drawing two parallel lines representing the highest and lowest limits of the range. So this point here refers to the highest point of a pitch range, and this here refers to the lowest point of a pitch range. We said previously that in situations where strong feelings are to be expressed, we can make use of extra pitch height. So if we want to represent the difference between a normal unemphatic yes and a strong emphatic yes, it could be something like this. We will use a new symbol, a vertical upward arrow, to indicate extra pitch height, so that we can distinguish between, as we said, a normal unemphatic yes and a strong emphatic yes. 15.4 Some functions of English tones. So far, only a very small part of English intonation has been introduced. We will now see if it is possible to state in what circumstances the different tones are used within the very limited context of the words yes and no. That's to say, in this section, we will talk about the various functions expressed by tones. The fall tone. This tone is regarded as more or less neutral. If someone is asked a question and replies yes or no, it will be understood that the question is now answered and there is nothing more to be said. That's to say, the fall tone could be said to express finality. The rise tone. This tone is used to convey an impression that something more is to follow. Let's take an example of a conversation between person A and person B. Person A, wishing to attract B's attention, "Excuse me." A possible reply from person B would be like,
yes.
In this sense, B's reply is perhaps equivalent to what do you want? Or, for example, it means B is telling person A to go on. Let's take another example. Suppose for the sake of a drama that B is being given the instruction to A's house and A begins the conversation by saying, You start off on the ring road.
Yes.
Turn left at the first roundabout.
Yes.
And ours is the third house on the left. Now, whatever B replies to this last utterance of A, it would be more unlikely to be a rising tone again, since A has clearly finished his or her instructions and it would be pointless to prompt him or her to continue. The fall-rise tone. The fall-rise is used a lot in English and has some rather special functions, one of which is to express limited agreement or response with reservations. For example, I've heard that it's a good school.
Yes.
Another example, it's not really an expensive book, is it?
No.
In the first example, B's reply would be taken to mean that he would not completely agree with what A said, and A would probably expect B to go on to explain why he was reluctant to agree. Similarly, in the second example, the fall rise in B's reply again indicates that he would not completely agree with A. Fall rise in such contexts almost always indicates both something given or conceded, and at the same time some reservation or hesitation. The rise-fall tone. The rise-fall tone is much less frequently used when compared to the fall-rise tone. It is used to convey rather strong feelings of approval, disapproval, or surprise. For example, you wouldn't do an awful thing like that, would you?
No.
Another example, I think you said it was the best so far.
Yes.
The level tone. This tone is certainly used in English, but in a rather restricted context. It almost always conveys, on single-syllable utterances, a feeling of saying something routine, uninteresting, or boring. For example, a teacher calling the names of students from a register will often do so using a level tone on each name, and the students are likely to respond with yes with their name when their name is called. Similarly, if one is being asked a series of questions for some purpose, such as applying for an insurance policy, one might reply to each question. For example, questions like, have you ever been in prison? Do you suffer from any serious illness? Or is your eyesight defective? One might reply to each question with no. A few meanings have been suggested for the 5 tones that have been introduced, but each tone may have many more such meanings. For example, we said that the falling tone gives an impression of finality, but this is not the only meaning that a fall tone conveys. Moreover, it would be quite wrong to conclude that in the above examples only the tones given would be appropriate. So, for example, in a specific context where a fall tone might occur, there is an equal possibility of other tones to occur. It is in fact almost impossible to find a context where one could not substitute a different tone. This is not the same thing as saying that any tone can be used in any context. The point is that no particular tone has a unique privilege of occurrence in a particular context. When we come to look at more complex intonation patterns, we will see that defining intonational meanings does not become any easier. 15.5 Tones on other words. We can now move on from examples of yes and no and see how some of these tones can be applied to other words, either single-syllable words or words of more than one syllable. In the case of polysyllabic words, that's to say words of more than one syllable, it is always the most strongly stressed syllable that receives the tone. The tone mark is equivalent to a stress mark. We will underline syllables that carry a tone from this point onwards. Example, we said that fall The fall tone usually suggests a final or definite feeling. For example, again. The rise tone often suggesting a question like tonight. When a speaker is giving a list of items, they often use a rise on each item until the last, which has a fall. For example, you can have it in red, blue, green, or black. The fall rise tone often suggesting uncertainty or hesitation, and the fall rise is sometimes used instead of rise in giving lists. And finally, the rise fall tone often sounds surprised or impressed.